Hi, I'm Casey. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my hair color because it is really time. I like to start a hair color video by saying, I don't think you should do your hair color at home. I think you should definitely see a hairstylist that has been trained for this and knows what they're doing, especially if you have already done your hair at home, because then you've got some kind of color on your hair that, if you're not using the exact same one, might not mix with the last one that you used. And you're going to have some terrible results and probably damage your hair, and it'll turn out terrible. However, since we're kind of still stuck at home, I have been coloring my hair at home, and I would do it every now and then anyway, but I'm able to get, professional hair color. So I would not go and buy hair color at a grocery store and put it on my hair. Just throwing that out there. I'm not saying you can't. You can do whatever you want. You're your own person. I'm just telling you, I wouldn't. And yeah, but I did get a request to actually do a hair color video, so I'm going to do it. And another problem is with it that I probably don't do it on my own head, as well as I would do it to somebody else. I mean, I know I don't. I think I started out by saying probably. I definitely do not. Because I really can't see to do the back anyway. The person who asked me to do it also wanted to know even about my capes. So honestly, when I do it at home, sometimes I don't even use a cape. I'll just, wear an old t-shirt or something or not worry about it. Also, if you don't want to buy a cape, you can certainly just use an old towel or devote one single towel to coloring your hair. The cape is just to protect your clothes underneath. And if you do want to go buy a cape, make sure that it's like a chemical cape, like that would be plastic, because that's what's going to protect your clothes. If you just get like a hair cutting cape that is cloth, it could sink past the cloth and get onto your clothes and stain them anyway. So, and I assume that any beauty supply chain, like Sally's or something, would have capes. Because I have grays that are very strong grays that grow out of this caliky area, I start by putting a straight peroxide developer on that spot for a smidgen before I start putting the rest of the color on, because it will kind of soften that coarse gray hair and make that be more penetratable with your hair color. Because sometimes gray hair really is very resistant to hair color. I am using an 8 and a 9, which, a 1 is like black and a 10 is like, light blonde. So I'm getting somewhere between, pretty close to, a blonde. Well, it's been the color I've been using, so it's around this. I do usually go in every second or third time. I do an all over color and throw in some highlights. And, for the last 25 years of my life, I would really only do my own hair color like once or twice before going in and having somebody else color it so that they could put in better highlights. I have not been now to somebody for like a year though, because, quarantining. Okay. I'm going to mix my 8 ash because I pull pretty golden no matter what. It's just what my hair wants to do is go goldeny blonde, which I don't mind. I don't want to actually be platinum icy white blonde. Some people look good in that. My skin tone, even though I have blue eyes and had been blonde as a child, I think I look washed out and kind of deathly ill when I have like the white blonde all over. I can do the white blonde highlights, but I need warmth in my other blonde. Anyway, and then the 9 is a blonde mocha. So that's what I'm mixing. I would think most people would actually want to start by sectioning their hair. And kind of line, because actually I kind of start with doing the outline first. So I'm just going to part down the middle, not do all of my sections yet. Okay, and I'm going to mix the color. Mixing bowl and brush. Mix it up. So. Also, you can reuse, these tubes many times. So like, if you just want a little bit of, like the ash blonde, you just seal it back up. I don't know. use the whole tube ever. This time I'll probably use the remainder of the tube, but just sharing that part. Also, most hair color tubes have, you know, the ounces along the side written so that you know how much of them to use. Like, so here it says half an ounce and 1 ounce and 1.5 ounces. So it was probably like a 3-ounce tube. So that you know how much developer to put in. Normally you mix it equal portions unless, you know, sometimes it'll actually say like, you know, mix it 2-to-1 ratio, but your color box will say. And then for the liquid part, you can actually measure it out, you know, so if I used 1.5 ounces of color, I pour 1.5 ounces in here. Or your hairstylist actually will have a scale that they'll usually weigh it on, so that, you know, because even squeezing it out of the tube, you know, if you squeeze this spot a little bit more than, you know, this spot, it's going to be different. So sometimes hairstylists will, you know, actually weigh it so that they're getting the correct proportions. And you at home are probably not doing that. Okay, so here's what it looks like. I tried to set it up here so that I could work in my mirror and you could see me, because I feel like I'm going to need the mirror more, you know, than being able to work in the camera. So I hope that this works, because I don't really think that my camera screen is good enough for me. Oh, and you should wear gloves so you don't dye your hands, and because of the peroxide, it also, you know, kind of can damage and hurt your hands. And because I'm using a blonde color, it doesn't really matter for me if I get it, you know, on my scalp more. But if I was using like a really dark color, that would definitely stain my skin. So you'd want to use some kind of protective color barrier, which, you know, can just be an oil or a Vaseline or something if you don't want to actually purchase something specifically designed for that. And you want to really try not to go super far out onto your ends, because if you've already colored that part, it's just going to be more damaging. You want to try to get it just on your new growth that's showing out. Also, if this was the first time I was ever coloring my hair, you would never want to start at your scalp, because your scalp is the hottest, so it's going to process the fastest. And your ends also process faster because they're so damaged, it will soak it up. So they call that like a cold strand here in the middle, from like an inch or so out from away from your head down to wherever your hair seems the most raggedy. And you'd want to definitely put it on that area first in sections. But since I'm not pulling anything out, I'm just doing my hairline. When my middle daughter lived with me at home, she would help me get the back of my hair where I couldn't see. Nadi really just isn't into the hair stuff at all, so I hate to always ask her. And because I would go in normally often enough to somebody else, I would usually just kind of skip the entire back from like here down, because I wasn't wearing it exactly in like pigtails very often where it mattered if it was split out. So I would get it like, because I often will have like this spot back here where it just starts separating on day 2, you know, or 3, and then I look like this anyway. So I did always want to try to get that part myself, but I didn't really care about the down here area. So I think sectioning it to get things kind of out of your way is a good way to go about things too. So really you just do kind of a part from front to back, and then from side to ear to side to ear. And I've pinned those sides out of the way, and then I'm going to do this part lying down, and then I'll start sectioning out. And you want to do this like about, for hair color, like 1/4 inch sections, so that you don't have little spots that you've missed all along the way. If you think you have super thin hair, you could maybe take a little bit larger partings, but I think it's better just not to risk it. So if you were doing bleach, you'd want to take even smaller sections, like an 1/8 of an inch partings, to do it throughout there. Otherwise, you're going to have, yeah, yucky little holiday spots. So I was originally thinking I would just, speed this part up, but maybe it'd be more fun to just tell you a story. For a while, like in about 2006, I got super into genealogy. Like, I was on Ancestry.com all the time and going to the library, and I was always like the youngest person there because everybody else was like 85. It was seemed to be looking into their ancestry. But I think what happened was my dad was dying and then did die, and he had dementia and lung cancer. So he wasn't, like you could really have conversations with him. And it kind of went quickly, really. And he had so many times tried to like, show me all these like old family pictures that we had, because we had some really cool ones. And I think I just, wasn't all that interested in these pictures. And then it made me feel really guilty and horrible. And I was totally wishing that I had paid attention, because the pictures were really cool. And I didn't know who anyone was, and I really wanted to. And it seemed like nobody else really knew, either. Like my mom knew, a few of the people, but certainly not all of them. And my dad's mother was actually still alive. I really kind of felt like she probably wouldn't be able to exactly tell me who the people in the pictures were either, because, it wasn't like she was super great memory about those things. I did end up, before she died, talking to her and bringing her some pictures, and like really the only one she kind of recognized was her own self, from her like own graduation picture. But anyway, I did at like another like family funeral or something, brought some, pictures and tried to, ask family members, and at a family reunion, and things like that. But anyway, I did most of the research like through Ancestry.com and did deep dives into that. And then even that's the reason that I ended up going to like Sweden in 2008, was we actually, I went to see like where my great grandparents were married, and where their parents were buried, and where their siblings were buried. And because it was my grandmother that was the first person to actually immigrate over, we still had pretty close family members. Not that we'd ever been in contact with ever, in my life or my mother's life, that still lived there. So I tracked them down and met with many of them, which was fun. So some of them we just met like for, like an hour, and other ones had us over for dinner. Other ones like took us around and showed us places and talked to us, much more about their family history too, and brought out pictures and got more pictures and that sort of thing. Took us to see, the cemeteries and the churches and that sort of thing. So anyway, it was super interesting. I was only planning on doing it with my mother and I at first, but when I actually told my husband that I met a man on the internet and was going over to Sweden to meet up with him, and he was going to introduce me to, ancestors and things, my husband thought it would probably be a good idea if he went along. Anyway, which also I felt the Swedish people were so nice, and even on like the community forums in the, I should keep working, on the Ancestry site, there were people there that just kind of wanted to help you. That's just all they did. So like you kind of give them the name of your grandmother and the year, she was born and where or something, and then they kind of did like some of the family tree searching for you. Anyway, this guy was, 20 years older than me, and was like a college professor or something. I really think he was just super into genealogy and stuff. It wasn't, like I was really meeting a man on the internet, but anyway. Okay, so this part in the back is where I don't do a great job because I can't see. So it's going to be messier than it should be. And this is again where taking small partings is going to be more helpful, because even if I do miss some, hopefully with my small enough partings, it will kind of, take it over anyway. Okay, so on that side of the family, my great-grandfather came over like 3 years before his wife and daughter, my grandma, came over, and they all went through Ellis Island, which I think was kind of interesting. And then he found a job as a tailor and worked like in New York for 3 years before he felt like, you know, he could afford to have his family join him. And then my grandmother and her mother came over and joined him. And then one thing that I think is kind of interesting in that line of the family, my grandparents then from like New York ended up moving kind of to like a Swedish community in Iowa. Let's see if I can do this backwards so that I can talk to you. And then eventually this Swedish town in Kansas called Lindsborg that, you know, I had always wanted to go to when I was doing all of this research, like in, you know, 2006, 2008, and never did make it to. And then last year when I moved with my husband's job, we are like 45 minutes from that town. So now I have been able to go see their grave and the town they lived in. And I just think that's really interesting. And then my grandmother went to college at K-State, which is where my daughter is now going to school, which I also think is interesting. My grandmother ticked her parents off and quit and stopped going. They wanted her to be a teacher, and apparently she did not want to be a teacher, and she moved into Kansas City and went to a different kind of college there that right now I don't even remember what kind of college it was, for like a year maybe, and then met my grandpa, which I'm sure really ticked off her parents, and married him. And then they moved to some really tiny town back from where he was from in Illinois. And I think for a while then the great-grandparents didn't really have too much to do with her, because I think they had, you know, not been completely dirt poor. And my grandfather's side of the family definitely was. And I think they just couldn't believe that she would choose that. And then she had 5 kids, and my mother was one of them. And then, anything else interesting on that side of the family? On my grandpa on that side family. Oh, one thing that I kind of thought was interesting. So they wanted, you know, to have much more American sounding names. So my grandmother's name was Marta, but when she came here, they changed it to Martha to make it sound more American. And so the good story on my grandfather's side of the family, actually there's probably many more, but this is one of my favorites. So my grandpa's grandpa was working on a farm, and he was poisoned. He died by drinking poisoned beer that was probably meant for the landowner, because he had been poisoned just a couple of days earlier by also drinking poisoned beer. Now, it seems kind of dumb of my grandfather then to start drinking poisoned beer off of his, you know, land or whatever, knowing that the man's beer had been poisoned. However, I think I've been told that maybe they didn't know yet, you know, what the guy died from, you know, but he, my great-great-grandfather, was digging the grave for the guy that had already been poisoned by beer. And then he and another guy went and had a beer, and then started feeling very, very sick, and he went home and barely made it home, and he died and left a really stinking poor, you know, wife with 3 kids. And then she kind of had to leave the area because, again, you know, I think they were poor enough when they had a man taking care of them. And of course, women at this time probably weren't allowed to do anything. So anyway, so that line of the family that I'm talking about now is, their last names would have been Mayfields. And the first Mayfield that came over in that line actually worked as an indentured servant. So he had worked, you know, like somebody paid his way over. And then he worked for like 7 years for free, working for the person until he kind of bought his freedom back. And then also in that line, during the Revolution War, the dad fought for the Tories and the sons fought for the American side, which I think is kind of interesting, and I would think would be a hard on a family to do. And then in that line also, I have a guy who actually was a bigamist and was married to 2 different women and had children with her on 2 different sides. And we come from the bastard line of the family. And I say that because it was actually written in a newspaper article where this guy, and I think his name was James, had to go to court to pay for his bastard children. And that side of the family, so the reason that he had the 2 wives is, at least this is what, you know, it says in library books anyway, that in order for this white guy to trade with the Native American Indians, they forced them to like take on wives to become one of them, so that they would have, you know, Indian children with them, and then they could trade with them. So this Mayfield wife guy had Jack Catherine Bryant was the name that they've given the Indian. Jack Catherine, I think, sounds like a cool badass name, by the way. Anyway, and she had 5 kids by him, and then Bridget, his white wife, had 3 kids by him, and they lived like, you know, 200 miles away from each other. I often wondered if Bridget really knew what was going on, or if, you know, she did and she was cool with it because, you know, like, then he made money and could do his trading. Anyway, what else then? One of my lines of the family on my dad's side, and this was the last name of a Hunsaker, was forced to come over. He had been thrown in prison for religious persecution, and a church group had, because he had a pregnant wife and like 3 other kids or something, and I'm not sure why they didn't have to go to jail. I'm sure they were all the same religion. Anyway, and these newspaper articles or whatever said, you know, he's thrown in prison naked. But the religious group fought for his right to get out of prison if he promised to take his family and leave to go to the Americas. So they were forced to leave. They had to make a pit stop, though, and actually gave birth to, the lady gave birth to her son in a different country along the way. Like, they got off the boat somewhere, and I guess they didn't want to give birth on the boat. I don't know. Okay, so I feel like this is pretty all the way through. Usually I would want to leave this on about 30 minutes. And I'm going to have Nadia check and see if she can see any terrible spots that I missed. Okay. The other thing I want to say before I shampoo about the whole genealogy thing that I found super interesting is how many times, like, siblings from one family married siblings from another family. And I think a lot of my family tree was in Illinois, where they were farmers, and you know, they probably didn't get out to see very many people. Like, you know, a lot of these people weren't in big cities. You know, there was miles and miles where they saw no one. So, you know, maybe that was the only people they saw. Or when, you know, because women were dying so young, so early, that where the guy would just marry like her sister. Then, when, you know, his first wife died, that seems strange. And how many kids they have. Like, I've got so many great-grand parents on my father's side, not really my mother's side, but they would have like 16 kids. And I guess to be like, to help them work around the farm. But I mean, one lady was, you know, her first baby was born when she was like 18, and her last baby when she was like 45. And then, you know, her husband dies a few years later. Like, so then she's got like 18 kids or something. Just can't even imagine living that kind of life. All right. I'll be back when my hair is done. Okay, this is the end of my hair color video. So this is how it has turned out. See, here in the back. Here's my little bad gray spot that I always have. Looks way better. I really do feel like it's probably been enough times now that I could probably add a few more highs and lows in there and have it look a lot better. Certainly not going to do it today though, because I don't want to. And it looks good enough for who sees me. And but probably in the next few days, I will go ahead and give myself some highlights. And if I do, I'll take you guys along for the ride and do some more of those too. Here's little Mo. I'm sure you've been missing seeing him. Look how big he has gotten. Like, remember the first time you saw him when he just came up to the door and meowing, wanting in? I can't think of anything else to say. So thanks for watching till the end, and see you in my next video.